here we go. This was, I didn't realize this tweet had blown up to this extent. It had a few thousand likes when I started this stream, and it really kind of blew up over the course of the day. This was like the first thing I saw when I woke up. Like, this was 7:45 a.m. This was the first thing I saw this morning when I woke up. I knew that this IPCC report was coming out. And this was literally the first thing. I just opened my phone and basically immediately saw this. These first two things, this 1-2 punch. So here's the CBC tweet about this. The UN climate panel has sounded a dire warning. Close my VLC. The UN climate panel has sounded a dire warning, saying the world is dangerously close to runaway warming, and that humans are unequivocally to blame. So I see this. I click on this tweet. I don't know why I clicked on it. You know what we say, you're not supposed to read the comments. But it's just, I just woke up. I see this tweet. I click on it, and I see this guy. Greg. At Halls344, posting this meme here. Heads down, incoming liberal bullshit. Fucking Greg. Classic Greg. Greg, by the way, in a picture with who's presumably his grandson. Let's check out Halls 344. Greg. Again, in a picture presumably with who's his grandson. Having a nice little moment with his grandson. And reacting to Rob has made another gross error. What error? So Greg, here with his grandson and reacting to news of like the planet's like rapidly decaying ecosystem, which is going to affect his little grandson here for his whole life, which is going to determine the kind of world that his grandson here, that Greg's grandson grows up in. And he's just like, what is this liberal bullshit? Talk about a grim fucking bio. You see, if you go on Twitter a lot, you see a lot of really bad stuff, right? This is really particularly bad, though. Proud Canadian with American roots. He's a news hound. He loves photography. He loves to read. He's a proud Canadian with American roots. Why would you put that? It's like, I'm Canadian, but don't worry. I'm like good Canadian. Did you see this in his replies? Clearly you're an idiot. Have a great day. Good luck in life. And Greg responds, This is the definition of a boomer meme, right? It's like I printed out a meme on my printer and put it on my bulletin board and then took a photo of it with my camera, with my physical camera. Mice die in mouse traps because they do not understand why the cheese is free. The same thing happens with socialism. Is that part of a wig on the top right? I'm going to guess. I don't know. I mean, that looks like it could be like some kind of a plant. That could be like a fishing thing, like a fishing lure or something? I don't know. Socialism owned. A riding crop? Yeah, possibly. Destroyed with King Uendo. I did not say Moomer. That's not true. That is not true. That's not accurate. Don't repeat this kind of disinformation in the chat, please. Yeah, just destroying socialism with facts and logic. That's great. And by the way, you can get free cheese, government cheese. You can get that under capitalism. Here's Greg's priorities. Again, we see his avatar with his grandkids. Obviously, he is thinking about their futures, though. Responding to friend of the stream, Gerald Butts, best friend of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who says, I'm an optimist, but the IPCC report asks us to do something we haven't been good at lately. Think more about future humans than ourselves. The next 30 to 40 years are baked into the atmosphere. Changes made today would hand a safe climate to our kids and grandkids. Are we up for it? I mean, according to Gerald Butt's friend Justin Trudeau, I would say, no, we're not up for it, considering he's been in charge of this country for now 5 years and has not addressed this in any way, and our emissions are all still rising, and all the promises we made about this are just complete bullshit. So judging from Gerald's friends, I would say, no, we're not up to it. But then Greg retweets this response here from Tracy Wilson, staff at CCFR CCDAF. I don't know what that is. Military mom, wife, daughter, gun goddess. The boomer guys, I'm sure, love Tracy. Does this also apply to considering the financial implications of saddling our kids, grandkids, and great-grandchildren with debt? What is going on with your brain if you're more worried about debt? Do you think it might be expensive to, clean up all the like extreme implications that we're all facing in terms of our society completely being destroyed and our way of life being destroyed by climate change? That might add something to the debt as well. We might want to take a look at that. Relocating millions of people whose houses are literally not underwater in our economy, but underwater like physically. Repairing all the infrastructure, growing food for all of us to live once the supply chain gets disrupted. Perhaps that might have something to do with the debt as well. Yeah, oh no, not debt. Not like the governments can just print out any fucking money they want. That's another thing that Tracy doesn't seem to understand, or Doug. This is what Archity Pizzero. This is what I've been saying. 90% of money doesn't physically exist. Debt exists in computers. That's what I would say to Tracy and Greg. If we're worried about debt, I would just argue that the people at the banks just go into that computer and just change those numbers. Just change them around. Mark up the account. But inflation. Inflation. And again, one thing that our ruling class never seems to try is that when inflation starts to happen, they don't just say like, stop deflating. I'm not going to, like, if I was in charge, that's what I would do. I would just be like, I am not going to press the big inflation button. And all my economic advisors are like, no, you have to press it. And I'd be like, no, we're not going to press the inflation button. We're actually going to deflate it. We're going to deflate it. That's what we're going to do. I would simply tell the inflation, no thank you. That's exactly right. Not enough people do this. So that's where Greg's mindset is at with this news. And again, this was the first thing I saw when I woke up today. And I just found it so fucking depressing. Because not only is it's so daunting, right? Everything is so daunting. Everything that has to happen in order for us to get out of this. There's many, many powerful interests that are in the way of, moving towards an actual solution to some of this stuff. And what this last year has really shown is that there's many people like Greg out there. We've seen this throughout COVID, who, when they're shown the real world implications of everything that's happening, their own families affected by it, they themselves are affected by it, and just when they ask the basic question, can we come together? Can we come together as a society to confront this like unprecedented global crisis? For a while at the beginning of the pandemic, I thought maybe that's what was going to happen, believe it or not. And what has happened actually is that the Gregs of the world have had their feelings and their priorities thought of basically first and foremost by our whole political class. And there's a whole lot of people out there that, regardless of the evidence of everything that's happening in front of them, are pretty determined, it seems, to just like go down with the ship and just be like, I'm not changing a goddamn thing about my lifestyle. I am not getting on board with the government doing anything to respond to this forcefully. And in fact, I'm going to, even just the very basic idea of like wearing a mask, putting a piece of cloth in front of my face to potentially limit the spread of a deadly disease, I'm going to not only not do that, but I'm going to make that my main like political cause. And I'm going to go to anti-mask rallies and go sign up to like school board meetings and scream at the schools that are trying to suggest that students wear masks to slow down the spread of a disease. That's how I don't want to say most people, that's how many people have responded to this crisis. And any real hope that I had that people like Greg would kind of come around once we started to see the impact of climate change has kind of evaporated. Because I realized that because it's not like we're talking about something that's in the far future, right? When we used to talk about climate change maybe 10 years ago, that's how we would talk about it, as something that was going to happen way in the future. You know, when I'm an old man, that's where we're going to really be seeing the consequences of this. And that has shifted a little bit, hasn't it? Over the last decade or so. And all of a sudden it's like, oh no, it's actually, we're going to see these consequences right now. And we're seeing that. Like it should be, it's out there for anyone to look at. This shit is starting to happen now. And it's only going to get worse. And this is how people like Greg are reacting to it. And just judging from the last year, I just know that's what we're going to see more of this decade. The more that our ruling class tries to like do something, even some cursory things like carbon taxes or these bare minimum moves to like do anything. Plastic straws. We all know that this is not having a fucking impact, and it's still creating this whole reactionary backlash. There's a whole bunch of people that, regardless that anything that our government does to try and solve this crisis, they're going to dig in their heels, and they're going to be 100% opposed to this every step of the way. And by the way, we often hear from our ruling class, like in our enlightened Western democracies, we love to lecture other countries about our precious democracy and how wonderful it is, and free speech and stuff like this. I don't know about you guys. I am starting to question the logic of basing our entire democracy around empowering the most ruthless, reactionary elements in an effort that will stop at nothing to ensure that no progress happens. I actually don't think that's very democratic at all. I've kind of had enough of this system, you know, where our whole system is populated by people that are literally either wanting to do the opposite about this or are just not doing enough, and that's our only option. In our democracy that we love to lecture other countries about, this is what is going on. My own uncle went full COVIDiot, got to the point where he fought with my parents, aunt, and grandma. He's barred from seeing my grandma because he refuses to get vaccinated. It's amazing, right? And we can count on seeing more of our family members and people that we thought maybe at one point had some kind of faculties about them or critical thinking just completely fall into these exact same things. So that doesn't give me a lot of hope for our ability to really confront this stuff. So on that subject, regardless of the sort of doomerist feelings I've been having about this, let's take a look at this video and some other materials based on this IPCC report. We'll just react to it, regardless of how fucking painful it is to do, and we'll spend the rest of the afternoon trying to go over that, and have some kind of a productive conversation about this. So here's the IPCC video they put out today, trailer for Climate Change 2021, the physical science basis. Here we go. This is an interesting question, Red Scary. Are you saying to me, Rob, that listening to the stupidest people in society isn't very democratic? Yeah, the stupidest and the most corrupt. This is an interesting question from Red Scary. How do communism debunkers deal with the fact that capitalism has been unable to solve the climate crisis? Isn't it at this point demonstrable that it's a failed system? Well, I would think so. I know you agree. I know we all agree that it's demonstrably a failed system. But I think G. Cluppy was joking, folks, about Amazon's new stadium in Seattle being called Climate Pledge Arena, so don't say the private sector can't fix this. I'm going to go ahead and say that G. Cluppy was being a little bit facetious in this statement, just before anyone starts flying off the handle, even though I actually agree that that is the solution. But, okay, so it's an interesting question, though. Like, isn't it, I think you just got Cluppy, baby. I would actually agree that it does seem demonstrable that our system has failed to address this. I mean, it should be pretty fucking obvious to everybody. But this is why I think a lot of the people in our ruling class who are fundamentally like wedded to the idea that we must keep this system perpetuating at all costs. That's why they talk so much about innovation. That's where the market is going to come and save us. I was mentioning this earlier, right? The innovation. Whether you talk about Jeff Bezos and the whole Blue Origin thing, oh yeah, we're going to move all that heavy industry into space, right? No problem. Or people, in our government climate plans, like in Canada, talking about getting to net zero by 2050. It's all based on this technology that doesn't exist, that we're just like inventing. We're just like inventing it in our minds, and we're factoring that into our climate change solution. This magical innovation. So that's what the market people will just say. That's their magical get out of jail free card, their skeleton key to just shut down every single debate about this, is that our precious market is going to finally deliver with this kind of innovation. And that's why they've been pushing things. That's why they're obsessed with electric cars, carbon capture, all this kind of shit. Because this is the way that once the market delivers all these electric vehicles, well, then that's going to have the impact. And we all know that this is not true. Again, one thing that would be better than electric vehicles is having free public transit for everybody, right? But because the market doesn't like that, that's why we don't do it. This exact limitation is what is preventing us from doing the things that we need to do. But in terms of what our ruling class is saying, our capitalist ruling class, they're imagining that the market and this kind of innovation is going to get us out of this crisis. I literally overheard my dad saying they're going to come up with some innovation, just plant a shit ton of trees. And the funny thing about that, Rudy Prospero, is that we can't even do that. Justin Trudeau promised, as part of his climate initiatives, to plant 1 billion trees, that is an important part of our response, what it has to be. We do need to be planting these kind of trees. Talk about carbon capture technology. The best carbon capture technology is a fucking forest, which we're cutting down right now. We're cutting down the Amazon. We're cutting down all these forests. So yeah, we do need more trees, and we can't even do that. That's something that's within our power to do, and we're not even able to do that under this big initiative about 1 billion trees that Justin Trudeau has talked about. Not one tree has been planted. So not only are we not doing anything in terms of like transitioning away from fossil fuels, but we're not even doing the very basic, easy to do things which we have the capability to do. A new American company called John E. Appleseed to disrupt the tree market. Yeah. What Johnny Appleseed does is they take trees from the Amazon and they physically ship them to wealthy suburbs in North America, and then they plant the trees there so wealthy children have shady places to play under. That's what they do. They transport the trees directly from the Amazon. We need to replant trees in Rocky Mountain National Park. I drove through it 2 days ago. It's burnt out, then mudslides. Yeah, it's like that. That does need to be an important part of our solution to this, and we're failing at that. I mean, I remember in the UK election, Jeremy Corbyn, that was part of his program, was we're going to plant these millions and millions of trees, and the whole unified reaction to Corbyn's promises on this were like, "You think you can plant that many trees? It's physically not possible, sir. In it," and that was, even though it is, and it is possible, and he was completely mocked just for this basic idea. Tesla needs to design some new trees. That's right. But yeah, Red Scary, that's right, though. It's failed for the last 50 years, but don't worry, we're going to solve it in the next 5. Like any year now, the market's going to kick into place and save us from here. SpaceX is launching a Dogecoin-funded billboard into space, so this is the magical ideas that technocrats have come up with. And Sam, this is an important point as well. We're constantly and incessantly at the whim of multiple conflicting propaganda efforts that are each running at a historically massive scale compared to anything the world has ever seen. They've largely succeeded in turning us against each other and freezing our efforts at material improvement of our lives, and I think it's driving all of us kind of insane. I 100% agree. I 100% agree with that. Yeah, that's a good, linking that to land back is important. I mean, that's why land back also has to be part of our climate plan, right? Because even if we start doing these things, when not entrusting them in these initiatives to the very people whose land you've stolen is going to lead us to the same cavalcade of forest fires. There's no way under our current system of government and under our current system of the way the economy works that we're getting out of this. Our whole system of government is in place to ensure that this process of resource extraction and land theft continues indefinitely. And no matter where you sit on the ideological spectrum or what part you're playing in terms of that electoral process, getting involved in the government, ultimately you're still contributing to that project. There's nothing that any of us can do to change the fact that that's the whole reason that these governments exist, is to ensure that that continues indefinitely. Let's continue watching this video. We can get to more of this stuff. I am a gamer, Charcoal. I am. Big time. Gamists unite. Gamer Canadians and gamer Americans, the most oppressed class. That's right. I'm glad you all agree, and Lodane especially agrees with this statement. This is very hopeful sounding music. Yeah, that was really uplifting. That was pretty uplifting. Let's take a look at some of the coverage of this. What's DW News? We can watch this BBC clip as well. When it comes to these when outlets like BBC or Vox, we've watched a couple of Vox videos about climate change. I usually trust their reporting about the scale of the crisis. When I start to tune out is when they start talking about the solutions. DW is a German thing. Okay. Let's check this out.
That human activities are responsible for climate change. That's the finding of a new study by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the most up-to-date assessment of how global warming will change the world in the coming decades. Environmental experts have called it a massive wake-up call to governments to cut emissions.
I mean, I understand people are calling it a massive wake-up call for governments to cut emissions, but personally, I found that previous IPCC climate change report to be also a pretty good wake-up call. You know, the last one that came out 2 years ago, that was we have basically 10 years to solve this, or we're completely fucked. Remember that? And there was a couple of weeks of there was maybe 2 news cycles where we kind of talked about this. And then there was the US election that happened, where climate change was barely brought up at any of the 1,000 debates that took place over the Democratic primary and the US presidential election. It was barely even fucking mentioned in comparison. I thought the last IPCC climate change report was actually a pretty significant wake-up call. So I'm wondering when they keep hitting the snooze button. Yeah, the snooze button is broken at this point. Or the previous one before that as well. There's been a number of wake-up calls. People were writing about this in the 30s. I mean, to say nothing of, the whole period of the 70s when the science on this became clear. Captain Planet is a good point, Dakadoon, because in the early, I remember being a kid in the early 90s and learning about the greenhouse effect and global warming and having cartoons that were out there like Captain Planet. I remember G.I. Joe had a big climate thing that they got on, where there's these climate polluting bad guys and stuff. And what was that other one? The Smoggies. The Suntots and the Smoggies. There was all kinds of pop culture that was about this very serious problem. I remember learning about this in school. I remember learning about all this shit. It was a completely settled thing. And we're here 30 years later. And we're still it's 2021. You know what I mean? I'm talking about 1991 right now. It's now 2021. And we still have this is a big wake-up call for the government. Perhaps now that they'll commit to cutting emissions. And it's it's been decades of this. It's been decades of wake-up calls now. When are we going to start to come to grips with the idea that we're not doing nearly enough, and that doesn't seem to be on offer at any time in the future? When are we allowed to talk about this? My mom encouraged me to watch Captain Planet because it was basically witchcraft. 5 elements used to summon some shit. Fuck yeah, dude. That was cool. And it was very unfortunate that I can't remember the name of the wind powered Planeteer from Russia, but she should have used her wind powers to defend the Soviet Union and to prevent the collapse of the Soviet Union, in my view. That was a big missed opportunity on her part. We are ruled by a generation of dementia patients who don't know where they are, all self-serving, no future vision, like the USSR at the end. We just got to hope the US collapses fast enough. Well, that's kind of the main problem, though, Cape Cod-Munist, is that it certainly seems like the US is in this process of collapse. But as we've seen throughout history, we saw this with Rome, these big empires don't just like collapse. It's not this speedy process. It's a decades-long process that in the case of the United States is probably going to have all kinds of fucked up, violent downstream events for all of us. You know, it's not something that's just going to happen. This is part of what's contributing to my doomerism, my doomerist feeling about this. Let's watch this clip.
34 authors from 66 countries have worked on the landmark assessment. The report says global average temperature rise could reach or exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 20 years. Now that is 10 years sooner than expected.
You see, I originally, we were talking about 1.52 degrees at the end of this century, right? Am I crazy about this? Like, I feel like just a few years ago, this kind of warming, we were talking about like the 2070s at the earliest kind of thing. And now it's like, oh, maybe not so much. Likely to hit 1.5 degrees warming limit within 20 years. And it's just accelerated. That's it. We're not doing anything. We're literally doubling and tripling down on all the worst things that are causing this. Lincoln should have enforced the will of 75% of the people of the USSR and not dissolved the Union. I 100% agree. Unfortunately, Lincoln, we're going to have to classify her as a revisionist. Which, you know, not much you can do. I think the US is going to try to invade us or Mexico right before it's officially done. Well, that space-time, we talked about this before a couple weeks ago. I don't know if it's your first time on the stream. We talked about this when we were talking about the water crisis. How there's whole parts of the US that's not going to have drinking water pretty soon. Like, this is not some far future thing. This is happening right now. And when things get desperate enough, I don't doubt that I really sincerely do not doubt that the United States is going to start looking to Canada and all our vast freshwater supplies that still exist that haven't been polluted and be like, some nice looking freshwater you got there. Would be a shame if someone were to come and just drink that from. That's what's going to be. So that's literally what's going to happen. Wonderful. But we're the libs owned. That's right. We're going to all die in a biblical catastrophe of climate events. But at least our friends like Greg will know that they own the libs in the process. Turns out looking toward the best case scenario because all your research and your innovation is funded by oil and gas does not produce quality research. It kind of seems like that, by the way.
That temperature rise will breach the ambition of the 2015 Paris
2040.
Climate Agreement.
That's coming up soon.
And bring widespread devastation and unprecedented extreme weather.
It's 2022 in 4 months,
less
folks.
Than 3 months before the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow in Scotland. Vital UN talks that will determine the future course of efforts to tackle climate change. And the UK minister responsible for delivering COP26 has released this statement following the publication of today's report. He says, our message to every country...
My kid will be 24 in 2040. Jesus fucking Christ. Yeah, my kid's going to be 23. Around the same age. It's really enough to make you feel pretty angry, I would say. it's a separate discussion. I was going to maybe get into this later. It's a separate discussion, but it's the kind of thing that makes you feel crazy because in my personal view, the executives and media types and political types that have deliberately lied about this, and there are many of these people who have deliberately lied about this for their own gain, in my view, that's a pretty serious crime when we're talking about the consequences that we're all going to be dealing with and that our kids are going to deal with. And, if you talk about people like that being like punished for like having to experience some form of justice for committing this very grave crime, well, you'll be smeared. People say all kinds of crazy stuff about you, that you support like authoritarianism or you support violence. And, I think that's a conversation that we should be having. The biggest thing that gets me, as it was 2 years ago, is that this will be out of the news cycle by the end of the week. Brought up maybe 2 more times by the end of the year, if we're lucky, and in 2023 we'll still be saying the same thing. Yeah, in 2024, that's it. We'll be in the third or fourth year of the Biden presidency. They'll be barely struggling to implement even their like threadbare vision of like a future process to help things, and then they'll most likely just be completely washed away by complete right-wing psychos who will undo all the meager little things that they've attempted to do. That's kind of where we're looking at in the United States. I need oil tankers burning trash fuel to bring me my sauce for my burgers. Did you ever think of my fat? Well, that's true. We can't possibly do anything to alter or affect these lifestyles that we've kind of become accustomed to. Washed away. What's the increase in drilling permits Biden approved? Well, there's that. Yeah, although whenever I would say in the primary how much of a fucking disaster Biden would be, I was often reminded, Rob, Joe Biden, you might not like him. He might be against that Green New Deal, but he's going to have that $1 trillion climate plan coming into effect. And still waiting to see how that's going to work out. I assume eventually they're going to do that. I know in their like bipartisan infrastructure thing that they're trying to pass, I'm pretty sure that they've pretty much removed all that shit. Anyway, I'm sure any day now the Biden administration is going to get started on that big $1 trillion spending initiative to deal with this problem. Let's continue. We're 1:17 into this video, so let's try and make it through this. We should be able to do this 10-minute video. Here we go.
Country, government, business, and part of society is simple. The next decade is decisive. Follow the science and embrace your responsibility to keep the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. Our environment and energy analyst Roger Harabin has more.
Wildfires blazing through Greece and Turkey have horrified.
It's interesting, the whole harm reduction argument. Like, I know I'm shitting on liberals and their ability to confront this, as I often talk about Justin Trudeau, and I do like understand why people are cynical about that. Maybe this is one of my most liberal opinions, is that I do still kind of believe in this concept, and that I think you can hold the idea in your mind. You can hold the idea simultaneously that like what we're doing is not enough. Our liberals are not helping us. Our whole system of government is not adequate. Our whole economic system is not adequate. And also, while these bourgeois elections are going on, we can maybe do what we can to extract whatever concessions that are possible in each given moment and make things ever so slightly better. Like I think this is probably one of my most liberal opinions. Like probably as much as I've talked endlessly about Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, I would probably go and vote for the Liberal Party if it meant having them. I just generally think it would be better for them being in power than conservatives.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, regular mole rat dragon, for the 4 months of tier 1. I appreciate that. Regular mole rat dragon. But that's the thing. I think ultimately we can have this conversation about harm reduction and the lesser of two evils. Like, I think when you call something the lesser of two evils, you're acknowledging that both of these things are evil and bad, but generally, like, one is still superior to the other. But I think you can simultaneously, like, do what you can in that system to prevent the absolute worst people from taking over and just keeping at bad, regular, bad, evil people, while still simultaneously believing that, like, this current system that we're on, this current path, regardless of what choice we make, is not really having any kind of impact. Yeah, so this is it, for sure. The thought that we could ever push the liberals left is naive, which I bet you'd also agree with. Absolutely. I do agree with that. I've never really believed that. I generally believe, like, in terms of my own, like, many people get hurt by both of these parties being in power. Whether you have these extremely reactionary side or the more neoliberal side. Both of these, they're both evil. I view one side as being less evil, even if the distinction is kind of meaningless at that point. And I think you can, like, if there's gonna be a bourgeois election happening, you can go and pull the lever for the evil liberals instead of the, like, psychotic conservatives, while still holding the idea in your mind that nothing is adequate about what we're doing and that we do need to, like, completely overthrow our whole political system and economic system. You know? I think you can believe these two things at the same time. One is holding a knife, the other is holding a serrated knife. I think this is part of the problem that I like people get naturally. People very naturally and understandably completely check out of this process of electoralism when they see the Democratic Party or the Liberal Party or whatever one of these, like, establishment neoliberal parties governed in comparison to what they talked about. And people are just like, well, fuck this. I just don't want to participate in this. And I completely get that reaction. A lot of people that I find make these arguments, though, don't really offer much in the way of alternative. And often it's just like, well, obviously we just need to overthrow capitalism. We need to overthrow our whole electoral system. And that's what we need to do instead of voting. But don't really seem to be willing or able to take part in the actual serious effort that would need to be done to actually do these things.
Have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you for the Prime, Rail Roberto. Thank you very much. I guess that's the kind of thing. It's like we can go on and say, like, what we need to do are like revolutionary people's war. We need to we completely sign up from these. Not that I would say that, but, like, that's just a thought experiment, right? People are like, you know, we're gonna completely leave this whole electoral process, and we're just gonna do a revolutionary people's war to completely overthrow our whole economic and democratic system. And, like, if you believe that, then it's like, okay, but what are you actually doing? Are you just saying these things? Are you just talking about this? Are you actually, like, taking steps to create that reality? Like, and for a lot of the people that I see, very rightfully complaining about our electoral system or our completely failed democratic system, aren't actually willing to do the work that's going to be required to move on from that system. This is kind of the central problem, right? I have heard other people say this. Again, we're just doing thought experiments, right? I think, like, again, and everyone understands my position on this, I hope. I talk often about the Democratic Party, the liberals, the way that, like, our neoliberal establishment are completely unequipped to deal with any of these crises that we're facing. That I do think, in fact, that, you know, we do need to, like, dramatically re-envision our whole approach to democracy, our whole approach to the economy and all this stuff. But I think it's really, really easy to just like say that and just be like, check out of the entire system and just say it's all bad, it's all garbage. And which is there's a lot of truth to that statement. Obviously, I agree with that. But it becomes a very easy position to just say that and then kind of do nothing in response. And for me, it's a way to it's a way for people to give themselves the excuse to just completely checking out of everything. So you know what I mean? I understand the complaints about this whole fake democracy and our whole stupid capitalist political system. That's not going to solve the crisis. I agree with all these arguments. But to me, I think you can understand this. You can understand these shortcomings while also just like taking time out of your day to pull the lever for the slightly less evil people. While we create the conditions necessary to genuinely move on from this stuff, you know? Although, by the way, I'm talking about Canada where it's very easy for me it takes like 5 minutes for me to vote. I would certainly not line up for 9 fucking hours to vote for the Democratic Party. Don't get me wrong. Please, don't get me wrong. And I would certainly not shame people for wanting to completely check out of that process. But I do think there's a little bit of a thing where we see, especially online, where it's just like, it's very easy to hold that position. Both parties are bad. They're all evil. And I'm not doing it. I hate them all. And just not really doing anything to create an alternative to that. Yeah, people like me in poverty fall through the cracks when nobody on my side shows up to the polls at all, locally and nationally, because votes sway what little social benefits and programs we were able to pull from those shitlords in charge. Yeah, totally. I mean, like using the United States under Obama as an example, there was that whole like Medicaid expansion. Was one positive thing that Obama threw into his healthcare initiatives, which were not good on its face. But then you had all these Republican-controlled legislatures just like saying no, and just being like, the federal government is just like giving us money to give to poor people to get healthcare, and they're just like, no, we don't want it. You know? So there are, regardless of whether it's enough or whether it's important, my state blocked it. Yeah, this is what I mean. Regardless of whether like the liberals are on our side or not, and I agree that they're not. There are things that can be tweaked along the way. This is why I'm more forgiving of this like Justice Democrat strategy of slowly running more progressive people in these Democratic primaries. I totally get why people are like upset that like, oh well, they're just working with the Democratic Party. They just like get subsumed by the system. You know, it's not the change that we all need. It's not the drastic solution that we all need. And I agree with that. But I still think overall, it's something. It's something that's going to alleviate the fucking alienation that some people are feeling in the system. Is if more progressive-minded people get involved in this process. No, it's not enough. It will never be enough. I agree. But just because it's not enough doesn't mean that it's completely worthless. I do this special chip on my shoulder for leftists who say that non-voters are privileged leftists. Yeah, like Rudy Prospero, I wouldn't shame anyone for not wanting to participate in this system. Like I do get it. I do get that inclination. I do think there's an element of that. I think there's an element of people online who do kind of take this holier than thou position about voting and saying that anyone that votes for one of these liberal bourgeois parties is or whatever, a capitalist, an imperialist, or whatever, who often are not experiencing the kind of conditions themselves that could possibly be changed or helped by having more progressive-minded people in charge of the government. I do think there's an element of that, but I wouldn't say that every single person that checks out of this process. I wouldn't say that like everyone that completely just gives up on this process and checks out is like privileged. I do think there is an element of that though, in terms of some of these like sort of social media people that talk about this all the day. Hopefully that made sense. I wanted to talk about this since the latest Insurgents episode that we did with Mike from PA, because we got a little pushback on that. on that interview that we did, talking about this process and talking about the sort of AOC types and the social democrats getting involved in the Democratic Party. Like, oh, is that enough? Is that going to be enough? And it's like, no, it's not. It is not. It's not enough whatsoever. I agree. But like, I do think that it's something. It's something that maybe is a worthwhile thing that people can participate in along the way to creating the conditions necessary that we all need. We all agree we all need to completely overthrow the way that we do things economically and politically. And whether I don't know if you want to call me a lib, if you think this is a lib opinion to have, perhaps it is. Again, I wouldn't line up for 9 hours to vote for the Democratic Party under any circumstances. So don't get me wrong. It's a lot easier to vote here where I live than in a number of other places. So let's watch more of this clip on this BBC report on the IPCC climate report.
Wildfires blazing through Greece and Turkey have horrified people in the region. The panel concludes we'll see a lot more fires as temperatures continue to rise.
The footage from Greece has been fucking
and rise
crazy.
They will as greenhouse gas emissions keep growing and growing. The increased heat will change weather patterns, bringing more droughts and more rainfall, researchers say. London was shocked to find areas underwater a few weeks ago. Rainfall patterns are hard to predict, but experts say Northern Europe will be wetter overall. At London's Hampstead Ponds, they've already had to raise and reinforce the dams to protect hundreds of homes downstream from the sort of floods expected in extreme rains that are forecast to come.
Similarly annoying this is the most important election of our lives, people who are always putting words in black and brown people's mouths. That's so weird. Yeah, and especially because Red Scary, that's a thing that you understand as well as you get older and you go through a couple of elections. And, I've been paying fairly close attention to, politics in general, but like U.S. elections. Like 2004 was the first U.S. election that I really paid close attention to, and it was happening. And they said it then as well. And they literally say it every single year. It's every single election it's never not going to be the most important election of our lifetimes. It will always be the most important one until the next one. So yeah, it is very annoying, that kind of shit. Yeah, I just mean the leftists who characterize non-voters as white privileged leftists and not what they actually are, disenfranchised minorities who rightfully feel left behind. Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I mean, that's the reason no wonder people don't participate in the political process. People inherently understand that ultimately, especially since the beginning of the dawn of the neoliberal era with Reagan and all this, Reagan and Thatcher in the 80s, people understand that there's no party that's going to be in charge that's going to really help my material conditions. Even if there might be slight differences like what I'm talking about. Overall, people's lives have gotten much worse since that period in terms of their ability to afford basic things, afford housing, education, healthcare, all this stuff. All of this has gotten worse over the past couple of decades, no matter who's in charge. So people do implicitly understand that there's this is all bullshit. Why spend my time if it's if neither party is going to do anything about this? Yeah, I 100% agree. I understand why people do check out of that process. That's why I supported Bernie's campaign. That's why I generally support these kind of campaigns to use these elections to try and sell people on a different vision for what the government is supposed to be able to accomplish, and speak to people that have checked out of this process, and don't just speak to the people that are reliable voters every single election, and speak to, we have to reach out to these suburban fucking McMansion owning, SUV loving, cop loving weirdos, I think that's the real value of these election seasons and these election campaigns, is specifically speaking to these people that have checked out of the process.
The cost has been huge. We're already paying the price of ignoring scientists' warnings on climate change.
So this report states as an absolute fact that human influence is warming the climate. and that's a very stark reminder.
Again, it's an absolute fact.
It is.
It's been an absolute fact for 30 years. This is the really weird thing about this. This is the wake-up call. This report proves conclusively that human beings are causing this crisis. And it's like, we know this. We know. It's been a fact. Like, again, it was a fact 30 years ago. It was a fact in the 70s. When Exxon did this research, it was the late 70s. And probably before this as well. Every single Western PM or president have been butchered since well before Reagan and Thatcher, just happen to not be white people, so it doesn't count. Well, that's of course true. Magic-y, obviously. I mean, our whole wonderful lifestyles that we've enjoyed here in the West have always been based on the exploitation of people in the global South for centuries. So obviously that's true. But I guess what I'm talking about is like people in the imperial core, even when their own lives have been like affected in the ways that they weren't as much over the previous few decades. And that's been enough to prove to people that like there's no point in really participating in this process because it's been a bipartisan project. But yeah, I agree with what you said though.
Our activities which are changing the climate and affecting these extreme weather events. And as the planet continues to warm, these consequences just get worse.
Ice in the Arctic is melting faster than many scientists predicted. That leads to sea level rise, which in turn increases coastal flooding. The seas will keep rising for maybe thousands of years because the ocean deep has absorbed so much heat already. Political attitudes are changing. The UK is getting electric cars. We need clean technology for home heating too. In the words of one leading scientist, we're not doomed, but if we want to avoid catastrophe, we have to drastically cut emissions.
Electric cars are not going to do it.
Roger Harrabin, BBC News.
This is what I was talking about too, about the market, right? The market's not going to get us out of this. The market is saying electric cars are the future, and it's not true. The future is like free public transit and, trains and public, high-speed rail and this shit, and public institutions. That's the real response that needs to be, but the market is saying electric vehicles. We can only have a solution if we commodify it. That's it. Yeah, talking about electric cars makes me literally insane. It's true. It's extremely fucking grim to think about this stuff.
Valerie Masson-Delmotte is a climate scientist and co-chair of one of the IPCC working groups which produced the climate change report. She said the threshold of keeping the global temperature at 1.5 degrees Celsius limit will be breached around 2050.
The report shows that in the next 20 years, global warming, the average temperature at the Earth's surface over a period of 20 years, is expected to reach or exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius above the late 1800s. However, if we rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, if we can reach global net zero CO2 emissions around 2050, it is extremely likely that we can keep global warming well below 2 degrees. If we do this, it is more likely than not that temperature would gradually decline to below or around 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, with a temporary overshoot of no more than 0.1 degrees Celsius. But if global greenhouse gas emissions remain around today's levels in the coming decades, we would reach 2 degrees of global warming by the middle of this century.
We're joined now by Tamsin Edwards, a climate scientist and one of the authors of this report. Welcome to BBC News. I know your area of expertise is the oceans and sea level change, and in fact you spent 3 years investigating this, haven't you? So it would be remiss of me not to find out more about that. What did you find exactly?
Well, that's right. We have over 200 authors in the whole report. We have looked at 14,000 scientific studies over 3 years. And I work on ice sheets and sea level rise. As you say, we don't do new research, we assess the robustness of the evidence. So, for example, for the Antarctic ice sheet, we looked at the range of possibilities of the future of the ice sheet and therefore its
Net
contribution
zero.
to sea level
Yeah.
rise.
And one of your findings is that the melting of Greenland glaciers is irreversible. Am I right?
Well, that's right. So there are different parts of
The Gulf Stream thing is extremely
You can count
fucked.
on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Outrun, for gifting a sub to Carnova. We're almost at the sub goal, folks. I don't want to interrupt this important topic. Don't make me start dancing. I will. I'll do it. I will do it. Don't get me wrong. But after this, though.
There are different ice regions around the world. We have the glaciers of the mountains and the polar regions, and we have the great ice sheets
You
of
can count on
Greenland
me.
and
You're going to have
Antarctica.
good old
The
Rob
mountain
to
and
talk
polar
you through
glaciers
all
are
this.
particularly.
Thank you very much, comrades. Social distancing for the 2 gifted subs. We hit the sub goal, folks. This is huge. This is huge. Thank you so much to everyone, and thank you again, Comrade Social Distancing and Outrun, for those gifted subs there. What was the promise again? Oh boy. Oh boy. Let's get through this video first. I don't want to distract anyone from this important issue.
Sensitive, and we have already committed to further melting over the next decades to hundreds of years. We're also going to see more ice loss from the Greenland ice sheet over the next century, over this century. And
I did want. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to mention too, and they were talking in that video about like, how we need different forms of heating and stuff. This is part of the tricky thing as well with these feedback loops that we're getting into now. Because we know that like air conditioning is not great for the environment, but like we're heading to the point of warming where it's like people need to have air conditioning now. All these places in like that are going to be experiencing these kind of heat domes in like, wherever these are going to pop up, like without air conditioning, millions of people will die as this continues to get worse. Like we need more people to have air conditioning in order to help people. And unfortunately, this contributes to the fucking crisis in the first place. Like we should be having a process in place to ensure that people in the global south have air conditioning and they're able to survive these like fucked up heat dome events. Like we literally need to. Air conditioning has to be a part of our solution to mitigating these causes. We can talk about the Gulf Stream next. That's talk about doomer shit. I mean, that's up there.
And for the Antarctic ice sheet, there's a really wide range of possibilities. If we limit greenhouse gas emissions, we may be fortunate and have a relatively low contribution to sea level rise. But if we have very high greenhouse gas emissions and we're unlucky with how sensitive that ice sheet is, we could see very high sea level rise indeed.
So am I right that the message is there's no going back from some change? Once they've melted, they can't be refrozen, I assume. But there is a cautious optimism that this could be slowed or indeed even halted, or is that putting it too optimistically?
We think that the mountain and polar glaciers, the smaller glaciers and also Arctic sea ice could have some reversible changes. So if we limit warming and eventually reduce temperatures further, that those could regrow.
Can we hear some
and
cautious
restore to
optimism,
some degree.
please?
The ice sheets are much slower to respond. So Greenland and Antarctica will keep responding for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And combined with the warming of the ocean, which makes it expand and contribute to sea level rise, that means sea levels are going to remain elevated for thousands of years.
I was very struck by what Inga Anderson said, the executive director of the UN Environment Programme. She said, scientists have been telling us for over 3 decades of the dangers of allowing the planet to warm. The world listened but did not hear. And I wondered, do you think government and people will... It's a difference, isn't it, between taking any notice of this and doing something about it?
We're taking lots of notice.
Of course. I mean, speaking personally, I do sense
not so much
real
doing the
shift
stuff
in the conversation over the last few years.
Yeah, the conversation. There has been a shift in the conversation. I agree.
Much more comprehensive than ever before. Assessed more of the scientific.
We're not doing the
evidence
stuff,
than ever before.
unfortunately.
Obviously, the timing with respect to the COP26 meeting later this year, it really shows that if we do have immediate, rapid,
we got to start doing the stuff.
Reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, we can still limit warming to 1.5 degrees above the sort of late 1800s, as we've heard, without much overshoot, and eventually go to lower warming again. But if we don't enact the policies and pledges that we already have in place, and in fact, if we don't make those stronger, then we won't meet that target.
But what are your conclusions about reducing those greenhouse gas emissions and keeping temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels? Can it be done?
Well, this particular part of the IPCC report is called the Working Group 1 report, which is around the science of climate change. And so we looked at different scenarios of emissions and what that would mean for climate change.
Hey, Aislinn.
What we need to look out for next year is the third working group, which looks at mitigation. In other words, where are those emissions coming from? What are the different pathways to cutting those emissions? So that will give much more of that detail about exactly the how of cutting emissions. Whereas what this report is doing is showing the implications of very low emissions or medium, intermediate emissions, or very high, what that actually implies for the extreme weather, for the sea level rise and other changes in climate.
No, I understand. That's really useful. Tamsin Edwards, climate scientist at King's College London and one of the authors of the report. Thanks so much for your time. It is...
To me, this is the... You're talking about doomer shit. Oh, that's not what I want. The Canada Files is not the doomer shit that I was referring to. Apologies to Aidan Jonah. This is the doomer graph to me. Because again, we're talking about the big wake-up call. We're talking about the big wake-up call that people in power have been receiving now. Oh, now we get the implications. Now we really understand this. And this graph, which shows this steady rise in CO2 going into our atmosphere, along with all the different wake-up calls we've gotten along the way. We've gotten a number of these wake-up calls. And, we've gotten together and had agreements and had conferences. We've had endless fucking conferences and different accords. Kyoto, Copenhagen, Paris, all these different things. It's not that we don't know about this issue. We've been literally agreeing to tackle this issue now for close to 50 fucking years. And the problem has just gotten worse. The problem has just continued to get worse. Making a climate agreement be binding instead of non-binding, that could be an option. I agree, that could be an option. But this is why, this argument of like, oh, the conversation is changing. The conversation is changing. We're really receiving this wake-up call now. That's why I'm not really compelled by this idea. I'm not super compelled by this idea. And listen, folks, I know things were really rough. I know it's very disappointing and scary. It fills me with anxiety and dread for the future. But it's not all bad, because check this out. Can't really get a good angle here. Is this making you feel better? Do you feel better at all? Even a little bit? Is that the hopium? Daft Tracks, get your mind out of the gutter, please. I feel a lot better. Okay, Brock Dragon feels better. A number of people feel better now. I'm happy to hear it. Very happy to hear it. I wonder if there's a video in this Gulfstream shit. Business news.
One of the world's most important ocean currents is showing some major signs of failure, according to a study published Thursday, prompting concerns there could be significant climate shifts across the world in what is likely the result of human-caused global warming. If the current were to stop, there could be a major shake-up in the world's climate, with the most likely impact being Western Europe falling into an indefinitely long cold snap.
This is amazing music to throw over this, like,
a similar situation is believed to have happened when the amok
SEO
stopped near the end of the
AI
Ice Age, with gas
created
bubbles suggesting
segment.
that the cold spell lasted around 1,000 years.
What the hell is
The
this?
slowdown is just hypothesized at this point based
This
on
is
the
all like an
indicators
AI
of warmer
speech
sea surface
thing as well.
temperatures and increasing freshwater intrusion. It would likely take years to definitively observe a slowdown in the amok based on how large and complex the current is. It's also not clear how long it might take for the current to shut down if it is actually slowing. The signs of destabilization being visible already is something that I wouldn't have expected and that I find scary, study author Nicholas Bors, of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany, told The Guardian. Scientists are worried the Earth's weather systems are continuing to become more extreme and unstable as a result of climate change, and an especially harsh summer in U.S. weather might be one of the consequences. In late June, temperatures in the typically mild Pacific Northwest soared to all-time record highs, with Portland, Oregon, hitting 116 degrees, and the mercury rising to 120 in Canada for the first time ever. The heat wave also took a devastating human toll, likely killing hundreds of people. Wildfires have also scorched millions of acres in the western U.S., with California on pace to surpass its record-shattering 2020 season in terms of the number of fires. Looking forward.
This is how the world ends, not with a bang, but with uplifting royalty-free music. I really do think that, like, an AI created this whole segment from beginning to end. They just fed a bunch of words into some machine and just spit out this video. It's pretty amazing.
Forecasters with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration are expecting a massive ramp-up in hurricane activity over the next few weeks, predicting what would be one of the most active Atlantic hurricane seasons in history.
Who is this?
The administration are expecting a massive ramp-up in hurricane activity over the next few weeks, predicting...
Oh, it's because she's predicting? It just had a keyword there, predicting, and it just brought in like some stock footage of like a climate soothsayer. What the hell is this? This is so bizarre. What the fuck? What is going on with this video? It's really weird to me. It is very dark. It's just highlighting the yellow words. It takes the keyword, and then it has some royalty-free footage that they can bring in there, or some whatever stock footage that they purchased. Crying, but also with a sick head nod going on, thanks to this inspiring beat. A few minutes ago, Brock Dragon posted the playing drums gif, and it synced up like totally perfectly. My animated emote there. This is just so bizarre.
Are expecting a massive ramp-up in hurricane activity over the next few weeks, predicting what would be one of the most active Atlantic hurricane seasons in history. A critical ocean system may be heading for collapse due to climate change. Study finds. The Washington Post. Climate crisis. Scientists spot warning signs of Gulf Stream collapse. The Guardian. Entire states of Minnesota and Wisconsin under air quality alerts from distant wildfires. Forbes. Hundreds likely dead after historic heat wave hits Pacific Northwest and Canada. Forbes. Hurricane season about to take a major turn for the worse, government forecasters say. Forbes.
This is so weird. That is so bizarre.
One of the world.
That was very strange. Business news. How many? What is just like some algorithmically produced news clip that just pumps out these videos? I guess. Clickbait stuff. It's actually kind of entertaining. But don't worry, folks, the US is launching its gigantic new $3 billion amphibious carrier ship. So, congratulations to the weapons manufacturers that designed and built that thing. They're all doing very well right now. So there are some positive things happening. Our weapons manufacturer friends are still just killing it in the game. So, I mean, this is what we're talking about here. A new analysis. The Gulf Stream could be veering towards irreversible collapse. This is why we're bringing this up. We were talking about this in the Discord server. Part of the UN International Panel on Climate Change that we're talking about right now. The Gulf Stream is a big part of that. Turns out that Gulf Stream is pretty important, though. We do need that, in fact.
The ocean conveyor belt and the Gulf Stream. Ocean currents have a direct influence on our lives. They determine our weather, our climate, and...
I love that the US Navy is streaming. They're playing Call of Duty to 9 viewers, and now they're up to 11 viewers on Twitch now. From 9. The Antifad is beating them with 19. We're just killing the US Navy right now. They might be doing okay in terms of like the weapons manufacturing grift, but we're fucking dominating the US Navy here on Twitch.
And much more. The ocean currents and wind systems transport heat from the equator to the poles and operate like a large engine for the global climate. In the oceans, there are numerous currents. The so-called ocean conveyor belt is very important for our climate. This term describes a combination of currents that result in 4 of the 5 global oceans exchanging water with each other. They form a worldwide circulation system. The conveyor belt is also called the thermohaline circulation, with thermo referring to the temperature and haline to the salt content of the water. Both determine the density of the water. While the masses of water may be moved in part by wind, primarily the different densities of the global oceans are responsible for their movement. Warm water has a lower density and rises, while cold water sinks. The water's density also increases with a higher salt content. At the equator, the heat from the sun is especially strong, resulting in a lot of evaporation and thus a rise in the water's salt content. That is where the Gulf Stream begins. The Gulf Stream is very important for the European climate.
Seems that way.
Its length of 10,000 kilometers makes it one of the largest and fastest ocean currents on Earth, and it's very warm. At roughly 2 meters a second, it brings up to 100 million cubic meters of water per second towards Europe. A constantly blowing wind, the southeast trade wind, drives warm surface water to the northwest into the Gulf of Mexico, where it heats up to 30 degrees Celsius. The turning of the Earth and the west winds then direct the Gulf Stream towards Europe and split it up. One part flows south, another east to the Canary Current, and a third part flows north where it releases a lot of heat into the atmosphere as the North Atlantic Current. The water becomes colder there. Its salt content and density rise on account of evaporation, and it drops down between Greenland, Norway and Iceland. There we also find the largest waterfall on Earth, the so-called chimneys, roughly 15-kilometer wide pillars with water falling up to 4,000 meters. 17 million cubic meters of water per second, or roughly 15 times more water than is carried by all the rivers in the world. This creates a strong maelstrom which constantly pulls in new water and is the reason that the Gulf Stream moves towards Europe. Countless species use the Gulf Stream as a means of transport on their trips from the Caribbean to northern areas. But it doesn't just bring us animals. An enormous quantity of warm air also comes with it. In order to produce the same heat which it brings to the shores of Europe, we would need 1 million nuclear power plants. That's why we also call the Gulf Stream a heat pump. Without it, the temperature would be significantly colder here, at least 5 to 10 degrees. Instead of lush fields, we would have long winters and sparse ice-covered landscapes in Europe. In the last few years, scientists and pundits in the media have repeatedly expressed the fear that the Gulf Stream could come to a standstill due to climate change. Because if the polar caps actually melt, the salt content in the water off Greenland would fall, as would its density. The North Atlantic Current would no longer be heavy enough, and so it wouldn't sink as usual. In the worst case, that would bring the Gulf Stream, our heat pump, to a stop. Some climate experts also assume that climate change could compensate for this effect. We know that it can be normal for the climate to change by looking at the development of the Earth over the last few million years. There are ice ages and warm periods. In the last ice age, a gigantic flood of melting water crippled the heat-bringing North Atlantic Current, covering the northern hemisphere in ice. Scientists have different views on the impact that climate change will have on the global ocean conveyor belt. But one thing is clear: when the climate changes, then the complex system of ocean currents and winds, which has remained fairly stable since the last ice age, will change in ways that we don't yet understand.
Cool. So it looks like it's going to pretty much solve itself, right? Everything's heating up, and once the Gulf Stream collapses, it'll be a nice little new ice age situation. It's going to cool everything down. So, problem solved. Did you all see this footage of the ferry in Greece?
Apocalyptic scenes.
It's just so fucking disturbing.
A terrifying overnight escape as more than 1,000 people evacuated the island of Evia, Greece. This is what they saw.
This is not like a film.
Pulling away to safety, the bright red flames lighting up the sky. A woman clutching her baby, another wiping away a tear. 3 hours away in the suburbs of Athens, firefighters water bombing flare-ups, but they can't keep up. Quick, this woman says, the houses are on fire. Nearby, a new blaze threatening this hilltop village.
On this side of the road, 2 priests are trying to save their monastery. And then come with me right here. You've got a single house. Apparently there's 1 person inside. These are all volunteers. There are no firefighters here.
And to the north, flames threatening ancient Olympia. This farmer says, when you violently disrespect the earth, it punishes you. 1 firefighter died and crews from at least 10 other nations on the way to help, despite the scorching triple-digit temperatures. With more than 100 fires burning across the country over the last 24 hours, one city official calling it a biblical catastrophe. And it's not over yet. Molly Hunter, NBC News, Krioneri, Greece.
Thanks for watching our YouTube.
It's just so fucking disturbing, these shots. Like that does not look real. You know? Looks like a special effect. There's more to talk about this. You know, let's let's reconvene on Wednesday, folks. Let's reconvene on Wednesday. We'll talk about more climate stuff on Wednesday because we've got plenty more to talk about.